Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Terra podcast, back to back with what I just said with Forever Red on the 20th anniversary retrospective of Power Rangers Wild Force. I don't know why I said Time Force in the last end of the episode from right now, because I should have never said Time Force. Time Force's 20th anniversary was last year. So for anyone who didn't know, 2022 is the 20th anniversary of Power Rangers Wild Force. And while I had already did my 25-year retrospective about Power Rangers Turbo, let's do Power Rangers Wild Force and celebrate its 20th anniversary as 2022 comes to a close. And at the time of this video's recording, this is the final 31 days of 2022. Man, you know, 2022 may have not been my year for Power Rangers, you know, with all the crap that's happened with JDF and everything. Let's see how the end of 2022 goes, as well as we also go into the Christmas season. Now, for a lot of you who didn't know, even when I did my initial retrospectives of Power Rangers on like Lost Galaxy, Lightspeed Rescue, Time Force, and them, I was going to do my 5 or 6 part retrospective of Wild Force in the style of Link Harvest History of Power Rangers on my channel back 5 years ago in 2017. But, you know, things came up, and, you know, of course, back when Saban still had Power Rangers, I could not be able to upload my Wild Force retrospective as planned, like in 6 parts, like I did the Time Force and Lightspeed Rescue videos I did years ago on the channel. But you can find my History of Power Ranger style retrospectives on Time Force and Lightspeed Rescue on PR Lost Galaxy 2014's Facebook page. Even though I don't even hardly use that page on Facebook anymore, because I'm just on so much social media. I don't think I even want to mess with the Facebook page for my YouTube channel, even though my channel had changed its name in 2019 as Power Rangers Lost Galaxy Fan Film. But again, you know, it's still PR Lost Galaxy 2014, just name change. You know, Power Rangers Wild Force is a season not many Power Ranger fans have very strong opinions for. Unless if you're into the team-up episodes of Reinforcements from the Future, or the characters like Cole, or villains like Master Org or Zenaku. But that's just about it, because like Wild Force was a season that was not intended to be in any shape or form better than Time Force. Because again, look, I think what it was, the reason why Wild Force is the way it is, and why when you look at it now, and even given in the light of the controversy with its Red Ranger played by Ricardo Medina Jr. Now, speaking of that, Power Rangers Wild Force's Red Ranger was played by an actor named Ricardo Medina Jr. And when you think about in the light of what he had gone through, you know, of course, what he did with the roommate killing and all of that, he basically killed the man. But again, he served his 6 years in prison after manslaughter for killing a roommate. And then, of course, he was released from prison in 2020. But it hasn't felt like it's been 6 years. It felt more like it was a 5-year sentence than a 6-year sentence. But then again, you know, Rick served his time, but though his life has been tainted, and who knows, like, once everything will likely clear up, or we'll never be able to, whenever they do another cast reunion with the Wild Force actors for like Power Morphicon and Ranger stops in the future again, who knows if they'll ever invite him again, even though he just been released from prison, or they'll probably just axe Rick Medina from appearing at any more Power Ranger conventions, given the light of his sentencing from 2015 for the roommate thing. So that's another reason. Even though, good thing Ricardo Medina Jr. already did these seasons of Power Rangers, you know, Wild Force and Samurai, before the 2015 murdering the roommate thing. So therefore, again, I did a video about Rick Medina's arrest for the murder of the roommate thing before, when the news broke out about him. But even though I just hope this stuff does not happen again with any other future Power Ranger actor, even if they do act out of anger with someone close to them in real life. Even though I don't know none of these Power Ranger actors personally, but even though I just hope it doesn't happen with anyone else from that have been on Power Rangers ever again. Even though there was a similar coincidence with the actor who played Mentor G and Emperor Grum from SPD and Samurai respectively, where he had gotten into some stuff like DUI or something and he'd been arrested, but even though, he was nothing but a piece of Grum anyway. But about the season itself, Wild Force, I remember seeing a teaser for the show at the end of Time Force's last episode 21 years ago. Because when they were going to, I remember in that exact, teaser, which was basically all Sentai footage, they were intending to use that theme song that they had already composed for Wild Force by the time Disney would, but then Disney would either pay royalties to use that theme song or come up with something brand new. Of course, the theme song we did end up getting, ended up being the better theme song that we had. Nothing wrong with the demo theme they had for Wild Force at the end of Time Force's final episode back 21 years ago, but I actually like the theme song we actually got. I mean, it's catchy, it's energetic, it's well-paced, and actually gets me excited for the season. Wild Force Power Rangers and all of that other stuff that, even though I don't even want to sing the theme song due to content ID. So I have to not sing it because I know it's a very catchy theme song. And, usually, here's the thing. Of all the theme songs for the post-Zordon era of Power Rangers, the theme songs haven't been that much, all that energetic for me, like with Lightspeed Rescue or Time Force's theme songs. But you probably should already know about my gripes about Lost Galaxy's theme. So, but when it comes to all four of the four post-Zordon season theme songs, if I would go ahead and rank the theme songs for the post-Zordon era, it would be like Wild Force at number 1, Lightspeed Rescue's theme at number 2, Lost Galaxy's theme 3rd, and Time Force's theme somewhat like, even though again, they got some great rock beats to them, but I'm just not a big fan of the lyrics of most of their theme songs. But the shows themselves are good. But I say Wild Force's theme song is the one that struck out the most. And I would say Wild Force's theme song is way more energetic than listening to Lost Galaxy's theme song when it's all about, when you compare it to with Wild Force, again, with Lost Galaxy's theme song, it was meant to be about like, you will go far into a galaxy and here's the keys to the answer of your powers and stuff like that. But it never really was about that. But Wild Force's theme song was basically about them like Power Rangers working together, never giving up. They will fight the orgs and save the Earth and stop them from polluting the Earth with their toxins and whatever else that their story and the theme song is about. And that's another reason why I prefer Wild Force's theme song than, let's say, Lost Galaxy's theme song or Lightspeed Rescue's theme. But again, the theme songs for most of the Power Rangers after In Space didn't really hit a chord with me growing up. Yeah, they were all right theme tunes to get me excited for those shows, but the themes themselves never really did it for me. And again, Lost Galaxy and Lightspeed Rescue's theme songs, good rock beats and all, but they don't get me that excited. But Wild Force's theme song did. I mean, well, what can you say about Wild Force's series overall? I mean, story-wise, I would say that of the 4 post-Zordon seasons, Wild Force was the most backstoried and layered season, despite it was not supposed to be an outdo of Time Force. Because actually, when you think about it, Wild Force was just basically a downplayed successor to Time Force. Because they already know that despite how critically lauded Time Force was and how it ended up being one of the most beloved seasons of all the Power Rangers, Time Force is still a beloved season, but it's just Wild Force just ended up getting the crap end of the stick because it's like it's not meant to be better than its successor because it's not supposed to. And no matter how special Time Force was, Wild Force was good at its own right, but there were things that made the show fall flat as time went on and as the show went on. Like, even after the Zenaku story. And while the team-up episodes, again, Forever Red and Reinforcements from the Future are still pretty awesome, even though Forever Red is still my favorite, while I do love Reinforcements from the Future for advancing the storylines, while advancing the Time Force cast and its storyline, but also even advancing the Wild Force characters from where they started to that particular point once they team up with Time Force, and especially in the extent about the team's Yellow Ranger, how she would go through a very significant change, which I'll get around with when I talk about the Rangers after I discuss the villains and allies of the season, and even the Wild Zords to a degree, because there's some things about Wild Force that I do like and still do, while there's some things that I don't like about, about the season of Power Rangers. Well, despite that, it was perhaps, I wouldn't say it's a terrible season. It was just one of those seasons that people kind of slept on after Time Force, because remember, this was the first season of Power Rangers after Saban, after Disney purchased the Power Rangers from Saban by the tail end of Time Force. And by the time Time Force had finished filming in its production, while the remaining episodes would finish up in the rest of 2001, Disney had purchased Power Rangers in late 2001. And, that's really, Disney buying a franchise. Well, that's unheard of. Because, again, who would have thought that a company like Disney, and I know I'm taking some sentiments Linkara said in his redo of this for History of Power Rangers. Forgive me. I know I shouldn't sound like Linkara, but I got to be my own person. But it's kind of impressive. Well, Disney buying a franchise? Wow, that's impressive. I mean, see how they would come later on when they do Marvel and Star Wars, and Lucasfilm in general with Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But it's crazy how that when Disney would buy Power Rangers, here's the thing. I did not know that Disney would get their hands on Power Rangers once Time Force was done and Saban Entertainment had folded at the end of Time Force. So Wild Force was basically, it had elements of a Saban season. It was shot like a Saban season. It felt like a Saban season. It acted like a Saban season. But the hands of production, hands off wise, was all Disney. But what we'll see come later on with Ninja Storm all the way to RPM, with Power Rangers being under Disney's ownership for the next 6 years after it, that Disney would do Power Rangers, but as we learned, and especially by the tail end of the era with Jungle Fury and RPM, that Disney never really gave a flying crap about Power Rangers. They had the show for 7 years, and they just, by the end of that 7th season they just wanted it dead on the water, dead in the water, and have Marvel and Star Wars to bank on, because at least Marvel and Star Wars are more well-known properties. Once if you think back to when Disney had Power Rangers, they were like, this show is only meant to sell toys. It was a stupid kid show back in the 90s. It's still a stupid kid show to us now in the 2000s. That was basically whoever was in charge of Disney at the time before Bob Iger was CEO at the time. So the people who was involved with, at Disney during the 2000s, of course, the same Disney that was doing Disney Channel shows like Kim Possible, That's So Raven, American Dragon, Phineas and Ferb, Hannah Montana, that Disney. And when it came to even the people behind the Disney movies that we had outside of Pixar, the films that we had like Lilo and Stitch, because again, what particular animated Disney film came out the same year as these Power Rangers? Lilo and Stitch. Oh yeah, there was also Treasure Planet, but who even cares about Treasure Planet, really? And while Disney themselves was going through somewhat of a rut after the Renaissance era by this point back then, and I still remember how Disney was in the early 2000s. After the Disney Renaissance era ended with their animated take on Tarzan, it was great. I still like that version of Tarzan. But Disney was going through a slump in the 2000s. Some of their animated films they had at the time, like The Emperor's New Groove and Brother Bear, Treasure Planet, they were either hit and miss. While I still liked Lilo and Stitch, although I haven't seen it in some time, still got the movie on DVD after 20 years. But, Disney was very uncertain about how they were going to do Power Rangers once they've already bought it from Saban. And no one never really thought that, Disney would take this property and just hardly do anything altruistic with it. And that's what sucked. That's exactly what sucked about, when Power Rangers was under Disney's ownership. They did those 7 seasons they did, but they never really gave a flying, shit about it. They did them, and after they finished RPM, and once they did Power Rangers RPM, and they did that 2010 reversion 8 years later, they basically washed their hands of this property and basically make Marvel and Star Wars big as all hell, as we know of Marvel and Star Wars today. But when Disney had Power Rangers, and like I said back in the 20 years of the Disney era rant that I did back in April of this year, that I wish that if Disney had done Power Rangers and if they still had the property, they could have still did something awesome with it. I mean, as much as I do like what Hasbro's doing with the brand, mainly with the Lightning collection and all of that, but when Disney had Power Rangers, they could have did some really altruistic stuff. They could have done interesting things. They could have done more Power Ranger movies. They could have done, a Power Ranger shared movie and show universe. They should have done Power Ranger video games more, even though the only Power Rangers game they did under their Disney Interactive studio division was, again, the Super Legends game, which was during Operation Overdrive and the 15th anniversary. But like I said, I know that by this point, the show was still airing on Fox, Fox for the first chunk of 2002. But after Fox Kids folded in September of 20 years ago, it would mainly appear for the further episodes of the show after the pre-ultimate episode for the transition between networks would air on ABC Family for the remainder of 2002. I would say this, but though the first half, now writing and acting wise, the first half of Wild Force was good, but by the time they changed networks and when the show would mainly air on ABC Family and as well as ABC Kids for the remainder of 2002, Power Rangers Wild Force pretty much fell off the rails. Fell off the rails by the time we got to the Animus Kite stuff, and I was not going to feel it anyway, because I know that when I was going to do my 6 to 7 part Wild Force retrospective video stuff in 2017, 5 years ago, before Saban saw what I was doing in those videos, if you recall in my Lightspeed Rescue and Time Force retrospectives that I'd done in multiple parts on this channel, but until I deleted them, I was going to go further, and I wanted someone close to me to help me discuss about Animus and how, humans suck and like they were doing harm and danger to the environment and stuff. But I felt like it would be too, it would be too, what's that word I'm looking for? Discussing about Animus and when I was trying to do that rant video about that storyline, because once the Animus storyline came along, aka the Homecoming arc, I basically lost interest in Wild Force for a little bit, because waiting to see when they're going to do that Red Ranger team up, that being Forever Red. And I remember how ABC Family heavily promoted Forever Red back in the day. I still remember that promo, but I don't think those old promos like that of Power Rangers are on YouTube via some archives anymore, because maybe due to content ID and copyright. Even back when Saban still had Power Rangers, there was like content ID about certain archived advertisements for like toy commercials or old Power Ranger ads on Fox and Disney and Nickelodeon on YouTube due to the copyright stuff when Saban still had Power Rangers at the time, during Saban Brands' ownership. I did like the show for its story, despite that it was lenient on telling more of the backstory about the Animarium and the Wild Zords. And I would say that Wild Force was kind of doing a Lost Galaxy do-over, explaining the backstory of the Zords and as well as the powers and also any ancient rangers that were tied to the Animarium, to the that was tied to the Wild Zords and the island of Animaria and everything else. So it's really hard, it was something that I wanted to see from Wild, like something like with Lost Galaxy, but Wild Force, it did delve more on the Wild Zords, and in fact the Zords were the focus as opposed to like the Car Zords in Turbo or some of the other stuff that we had that was the focus of the show. But even though RPM, when they did the post-apocalyptic stuff, while that had cars as a central theme, but the cars were not the focus. It was the survival of the human race and stuff against a sentient computer virus that Dr. K started. But Wild Force was about this Disney princess reject with CGI magical animals that are sentient or tied to a team of rangers that are part of the island of Animaria that would become the floating island of the Animarium. And then there's the Orgs. The Orgs are the forces that are endangering the Earth, and basically the season was also very lenient with its environmental message. Yeah, Power Rangers had its environmental messages in a couple of seasons, especially in the original Mighty Morphin days. But Wild Force really did harken back on that a little bit more harder than MMPR ever did. And I don't know if that was a good thing or it was a bad thing. But other than that, I mean, as a kid, I can get behind that, but knowing the fact with that kind of preaching about saving the environment and stuff like that, stop polluting crap and stuff. You're intoxicating our harmonious ecosystem and stuff. I guess Wild Force was very preachy on that, knowing the fact that humans and animals are part of the same ecosystem as each other on this earth. To the point, parts of Wild Force felt like I was watching. It's like you're taking elements of some preschool show about animals and educating kids about the ecosystem of the earth and animals and humans and animals coexisting in the same world, and all of that stuff. And then you have something that's toxic and pollutant like the orgs, because it feels like to me Wild Force came a little too late. Because knowing the fact with it, being very preachy about it, because look, this was, I know there were those kind of scientific pop cultural beliefs from the 1990s, but again, Captain Planet was well off the air at this point. And when Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was on, Captain Planet was a thing. If Wild Force was, if Sentai did Gal Ranger after like Kaku Ranger or O Ranger, if Captain Planet was still on the air for about 4 more seasons, they could have preached and capitalized on that. But again, Wild Force was a couple years too late from where Captain Planet was. And of course, it would get way worse when Megaforce and Super Megaforce would do it. Of all the time, well, especially during the first season of Megaforce, where they preach about save the environment and stuff. And no wonder we have a Pink Ranger who's a freaking environmentalist hippie. But it's just like well, again, with that in Megaforce. But but that's the problem here. And I really feel as though that, Wild Force did delve on it a bit too much. And, that's one of the few things that detracted me to enjoy the season. Yeah, sure, I'll tolerate it because, Power Rangers, just because Power Rangers is a kid show doesn't mean that you got to preach about, that, and also tell, if this whole season was a whole PSA about, saving the environment and say, of course we have to do that because, animals get endangered by stuff like this all the time. So we have to take action for stuff like that. As much as I still don't like that Animus Kite storyline after the Master's Last Stand and that last Zenaku episode, the episode about Merrick versus Zenaku before the storyline and before Forever Red and the 6-part end of the Power Rangers arc, I really feel like that's one of the core overlying thematic storylines of Wild Force as a whole. Even though I'm still not a fan of what they did, even though this was also lifted straight from what Gal Ranger did. Okay, now here's another thing that did weigh things down. In the thing Samurai, while I still don't like Samurai, but even though upon my rewatch, there are some things to like about Samurai, despite it's still not very good. But Wild Force was a carbon copy of Gal Ranger, but yeah, it did some original stuff than what Samurai did and attempted. At least I'll tolerate Wild Force doing more originality while hearkening and copy and pasting so much from its Sentai counterpart over what Samurai did. Because as much as I don't like Samurai, and still all these years later, at least I would say that Wild Force did that better regarding a Power Ranger season that was more faithful to its counterpart. So that's exactly what I felt when you think back to so I get it. So when I think about with them adapting so much from Gal Ranger. Now, Wild Force didn't need to copy and paste what Gal Ranger did per se. And, Time Force did it too, to a degree, but at least it's tolerable with that there. Because, of course, Wild Force, I would say Wild Force and Time Force were the, I would say perhaps were the more faithful seasons of Rangers that was very close to their Sentai counterparts to a degree. but I feel like they were a bit too faithful. Although they only did minor alter changes, like changing the lead villains, because like in Time Force we had what was Gluto's counterpart. We decided to pave the way for Ransik, because Ransik will be way more interesting, because again, that's the common thing when you have an American made villain for Power Rangers. When the villain is American made, limitless possibilities to make them more interesting than villains that we adapted from their respective Sentai counterparts. When you have a villain that's lifted from the Sentai footage, that's part of the main villains of each Ranger season, they either are good villains or bad villains or in between. And that's one of the reasons why villains like Ransik and Master Org, and in this case, in this era of Power Rangers during the early 2000s, excel. Well, say for Lothor and Ninja Storm when we get to its anniversary this coming 2023. While I did love Ransik as a male lead big bad villain for Time Force, who would later become an anti-hero and seek redemption in the two-part team up between Wild Force and Time Force, but Master Org was the more malevolent, violent, vicious, and ultra powerful leading big bads we've had in the post-Zordon era thus far for a male leading Power Rangers villain that's American made. While Master Org wasn't an American Power Rangers villain, since there was no Master Org type character in Gal Ranger besides what will be his final form for the end of the Power Rangers. But Master Org was made exclusive for Wild Force, but this is where Die Ranger paraphernalia comes to play, where they used the costume of the Emperor Gorma from Die Ranger for Master Org. Because again, there were intentions, that's kind of funny. Die Ranger, as good as that Sentai was, as we adapted it for some of Mighty Morphin Season 2, and adapting what was the Aura Changer for the Magna Defender Morpher, and then we come to this season, a main villain will have a costume of a villain from Die Ranger for the villain that's really more American made for Power Rangers, but to be used for Wild Force's main big bad. That's kind of funny, isn't it? I don't know what's up with these holdovers from Die Ranger still left over and what remains, because Die Ranger as a Sentai, it's complicated, because I don't know if I want to do a retrospective on Die Ranger, if I do any Sentai retrospectives or what. But Master Org was perhaps the most vicious, powerful, vile villain we have had in a long shot, because of all the post-Zordon era leading villains, we've had a really vicious, malevolent, power-hungry type villains we've had in a while. I mean, we started with Trakina, then Queen Banshira, Ransik, and now there's Master Org, who's the most powerful, hungry, vile, vicious villain. And that's one of the things I did like about the post-Zordon era Power Rangers, is how power-hungry and vicious and malicious the villains would get in this era. And I think this is due to the rise of mature storytelling thanks to In Space, and what it set the bar for Power Rangers going forward since that season. And with lead villains being more interesting than what they were, as opposed to those comic relief set of villains we had throughout the first 5 years of the show. But what I did like about the villains with Master Org, though, is how he is tied to the Red Ranger, because Master Org was once human, and something that Toxica had brought up and what was hinted throughout the first couple of episodes. And then when we got to the Secrets and Lies episode, and then more when we got further into that tie about Master Org and how he was once a friend of Cole's parents, and based on that photo that Cole kept looking at a lot in the first few couple of episodes, hinting that, Master Org eventually was going to have some ties to our Red Ranger, who, by the way, was raised in the jungle because his parents were quote-unquote murdered by Master Org. And I mean, they are dead, but Master Org did kill Cole's parents. And that was perhaps one of the most predatory, vicious, vile, psychopathic thing for a Power Rangers villain. And that's what I liked about Master Org. Sure, we couldn't get this kind of stuff out of like Trakina or Ransik or Queen Banshira, but Master Org was perhaps the most powerfully, psychologically messed up, predatory, and vicious villains we've had in the franchise. And while I did like Master Org as for who he was, but as we got to near the end of the season, you can see how, very vicious he would get, and how it would all come down to when we got to the 6th-part end of the Power Rangers arc, and when he ate the Org heart, and how very powerful he was when he destroyed everything that the Rangers had, from their weapons, Cole's Battleizer, the Cycles, the Wild Zords. I mean, everything, man, in the finale. And it just go to show that Master Org perhaps became one of my favorite, Power Ranger villains. I wish I had him in my list back in 2014 as one of my top 20 best Power Ranger villains. I think if I haven't did a video, maybe when I do a Dino Fury or so updated version of my top Power Ranger villains video on the podcast, like I did 8 years prior, maybe I might include Master Org on the list, because again, he was a really interesting villain. He was perhaps one of the best things to come out of Wild Force, and I have to give kudos to his actor. I'm sorry, Ilya, what's his name? Yeah. His actor, he did a great job playing such a very power-hungry, vicious, vile, predatory, evil for the sake of being evil, but with a purpose, Power Rangers villain. As for the other Org generals, now, Zenaku was fascinating, because when you go into the Zenaku storyline was perhaps very reminiscent to the Evil Green Ranger saga. But even though, in my humble opinion, looking back in retrospect, the Zenaku storyline did went on way too longer than I remembered, because I thought that, like Greenwood Evil, the Zenaku story should have stayed about like 5 episodes, but I realized the certain pattern of how it was structured. Like, once the Rangers lost a few of the Wild Zords they had at the time, like the 2 Bear Zords, the Elephant Zord, and the Giraffe, it feels as though they went on with it a bit too long, in my humble opinion. And I feel like maybe it should have stopped at about 4 or 5 episodes and call it that. They didn't need to carry on with it for as long as it could, much like as opposed to, let's say, the Lights of Orion saga in Lost Galaxy, and how long that stretched out a bit too thin and too long. Or any other storyline in, like, let's say, Dino Thunder that went on way too goddamn long. And I feel like, I think the Zenaku story went on. Yeah, I get they wanted to raise the stakes with the Rangers losing Zords, because again, while I do amend the season also being the first to have, like, before I get back to the villains again, Wild Force is the first season of Power Rangers to now start doing auxiliary Zords, because that was what Gal Ranger was doing at the time, the first instance of Super Sentai where we start doing auxiliary Zords to do rando amount of new Megazord combinations. So Wild Force was the first season to do this trend, and I thought this was the Neo Saban era, but no, I gotta go way back to the Disney era, starting with Wild Force and realizing Wild Force was the first season to do this trend, because as it was the 10th anniversary of Power Rangers, as Gal Ranger was Super Sentai's 25th anniversary a year before. Both Wild Force and Gal Ranger started the trend for both Super Sentai and Power Rangers to have the Zords, have Megazords that will do traditional annual auxiliary Zords and stuff every once in a while, and also start doing new Zord combos to also do, like, one day when we get to a pre-ultimate conclusion to the season with an episode that will introduce some sort of an Ultra Zord combo. And that's interesting because, yeah, but then I also have to think about based on my nostalgia with the season. Now, I've said this time and time before, when I was growing up with Power Rangers and my earlier years as a kid growing up on Power Rangers from Mighty Morphin through Wild Force, and especially with, little bits of Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder, but by the time I grew out of Power Rangers, I felt like I grew out of Power Rangers a little bit by SPD, but I still watched SPD, Mystic Force, and Overdrive, and then when they went on under Disney's ownership. But Wild Force was the last Power Ranger series I had the most amount of toys of, and it was the first Power Ranger season 20 years ago, we had the most action figures of Megazords. You can tell that I would say Bandai America in 2002 was going all out with Wild Force, as Wild Force, yes, was the 10th anniversary of Power Rangers, and they were being a bit very toyetic with the stuff they were putting out. And I remember collecting almost all of the toys for Wild Force. I actually managed to get all of the Savage cycles, well, say for the Luna Wolf Rangers. One. I still have all of the morphers, the Growlphone, the Luna Wolf Morphophone, and the Animarium Armor Battleizer Morpher. I used to have the Crystal Saber as a roleplay weapon. I mean, I used to even had, more importantly, the Megazords for Wild Force. The Wild Force Megazord, the Kongazord, Predazord. Well, my brother had the Predazord, and I had Animus's Megazord. But the only Megazord that I don't have, sadly, and I never did got 20 years later, still don't, 20 years later, is the Isis Megazord, where you just take the Rhino and Armadillo Zords, the Giraffe and the Deer Zord with the Falcon Zord, and make the Isis Megazord with that. Of course, you can also take part of the Isis Megazord with the Falcon Zord, and then, you know, the Lion Zord to make the Pegasus Megazord combo. You know, it's unfortunate, really, because of all of the Megazords. Well, Wild Force did had a good streak of Megazords for the toys, because that's what it was also in the show. It was daunting and frustrating that I never did got that Isis Megazord. I had nearly every Megazord for Wild Force. It's just the Isis Megazord I never did got. Okay, I don't want to gripe on with it. But back to the villains, though. But Zenaku, I do love his design. I do like he was a lone black wolf looking warrior Duke Org, and his design is cool, and he's still one of my top favorite villains of Power Rangers. Why do you think? I'm glad that we got him in the Legacy War game. I'm still waiting on his Lightning Collection figure, and since we got the Luna Wolf Ranger in the Lightning Collection, I was really hoping that if they were going to do the Luna Wolf, why couldn't do Zenaku in a 2-pack? But I guess they'll save Zenaku once all the Rangers are out of the way, and then once Hasbro goes back to doing more villains, they'll go back and do Zenaku. And yeah, because, you know, Zenaku was a very interesting character, but it's just the way how he petered out and how his storyline went on too long. But we learned that Merrick, who was Princess Shayla's protector and was, you know, who would later be the Lunar Wolf Ranger, but first was one of the many ancient Wild Force guardians. You know, he was cursed with the wolf mask in the final battle against Master Org 3,000 years earlier. And you know, I get that that was part of the backstory also, and how laden it was to that. And But once the curse was broke, and when the mask was destroyed and Zenaku was destroyed, then Merrick was freed from his inner demons after being cursed with the mask all those years ago. But I'll discuss a little bit about Merrick when I get to the Rangers. As for for Gindrax and Toxica. Now, Gindrax and Toxica, there's not much I can say about those two, but other than I can say is, they were villainous in a good way and a bad way, but they were kind of like the Bulk and Skull of villains, because they were also comic relief villains half of the time, even though Gindrax was more comical because, well, he's a Gesture or Duke Org who's based on that of a Gesture clown, and Toxica, well, she's just a sorceress. You know, basically, I actually come to think of it, when I look at Gindrax and Toxica were kind of like, they kind of remind me of Rita and Rito in a way, you know, in some ways, because to the point, to me, Gindrax and Toxica had this sort of a brother and sister bond going on while they were still evil, and when they did serve Master Org until way later, when Toxica and Gindrax found out Master Org is not really who they thought he was, and then when they had to serve other Duke Orgs, you know, General Orgs like, you know, Rent Nax and Mandalaka and General Nazor, I would say that they were, well, even though I also noticed the amount of a hand of abuse they had from the General Orgs, and as well as Master Org himself. To the point, I feel sorry for Gindrax and Toxica in some ways, because while they still have a thing against the Power Rangers, but they also had this, what I did like the subplot of how they knew about Master Org, mainly Toxica knowing about Master Org and what kind of a phony he was in a way. But even though Master Org had been gone for 3,000 years after being destroyed previously in that great battle on the island of Animaria. But then again, I actually feel like, you know, Toxica is starting to grow on me as a villain as well, even though she's not one of my favorite female villains. Character-wise, she was growing on me in how she was as a villain, even though despite even her little beef she had with the White Ranger. And yeah, it's kind of funny when you think about it. Anytime I see Toxica fighting Alyssa, the White Ranger, the Noble Tiger, I like how they always banter at each other about how, like, Alyssa's younger than Toxica, and Toxica is seen as the grandma old lady of the villains, when really Toxica is practically the same age as the White Ranger, okay? I mean, yeah, it's funny, but it still reminds me of that one 4Kids TV show with that kind of dialogue, Dinosaur King. And I remember there was that one character, the female villain character in Dinosaur King, who hated being called an old lady by that girl character. I forgot her name again. I used to watch that back when I was a teenager in the mid to late 2000s. Dinosaur King or was it Shaman King? One of them. Whatever, one of those two shows on CW for kids back in the day. But yeah, it reminds me of that piece of dialogue between Alyssa and Toxica. Now, Jindrax and Taylor's rivalry doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know if there was any cut moments or an episode that was cut from Wild Force's 40 episode run that could have explored more in Jindrax's backstory as to why did he had such a feud with the Yellow Ranger of Taylor. It's never explained. This is, again, another, you know, issue I had, like, back with Lost Galaxy. What is it with Deviant taking shit out on Maya, who is the Yellow Ranger? Did Deviant back 3,000 years ago in the conflict with Miranoi or whatever, during Lost Galaxy's 3,000 years such incident where Deviant must have fought a Yellow Galaxy Ranger one time and had some beef with him or her, if the Galaxy Yellow Ranger back then, 3,000 years ago, you know, that when they had that? I mean, Jindrax is up there with his feud of a Yellow Ranger, like with Deviant, but Jindrax and his feud with Taylor is kind of off-putting. I mean, it would make sense someone in Gal Ranger with Gal Yellow, and I forgot Jindrax's Gal Ranger name when I was watching the Sentai there. But then again, I mean, it just didn't make sense to me with those. Now, as for the general orgs of, you know, Mandalorian, Retnax, and General Nazor. Again, Retnax was only around for one episode, so I'm not going to include when we got to the very end, the pre-ultimate episode, before the end of the Power Rangers, sealing the Nexus. Yeah, Retnax only appeared for 2 episodes, you know, the episode when they got the Soul Bird, configuration for the Megazords, and, again, sealing the Nexus. But Retnax didn't really do it for me, and he wasn't really as memorable. While General Nazor was better and was cunning and conniving, he at least stood around and he caught my attention. Manalok, however, was boring. You know, he was all about polluting crap and eating junk. And that's all Manalok was for and was about. And I didn't really care for Manalok. Although, one fun fact, I did like that Manalok's female voice was voiced by Barbara Goodson, who was Rita Repulsa, Prince Sprocket, and them's voice. So, yeah, that's something. And the Putrets were alright foot soldiers, even though they're not as good as the Cyclobots or Stingwingers or the Quantrons, but the Putrets were alright foot soldiers for the Org villains. You know, they were fine. Okay, as for the Rangers, while the Rangers themselves was good, well, say for Merrick, I would say the character that shined the most was Cole. You know, again, in the light of, you know, bringing up Rick Medina's little thing about what he did in 2015, but we have to separate the actor from the character. Yeah, what Ricardo Medina Jr. did in 2015 with the roommate and murder and all that, put that aside and think about the character, because you gotta realize the character wouldn't, I mean, as a former Power Ranger, Cole would never murder somebody and never use his power to harm someone, even if he's human. I mean, sure, yeah, when Rick came back as Decker and Samurai, he always wanted to be arrival of a Red Ranger, so that paid off somewhat. But all right, but let's not talk about that. You know, Cole was one of the most interesting Red Rangers we had in some time, because perhaps one of the most, if not foremost, tragic Red Rangers. He was, you know, like I said, tying back to Master Org, how his, his parents were, when Cole was only an infant, his parents were looking for when they were doing research to see if the Animarium does exist. And then when they found the island, and when they found also, while in their voyage around the Animarium, they would find the seeds of Master Org, which Dr. Victor Adler took on, you know, as a way of revenge. Because again, we find a reasoning why Master Org would kill Cole's parents. And Cole had waited all this time. Once, you know, it was hinting that eventually that they were going to put the clues together as we got into episodes past when Merrick had became the Lunar Wolf Ranger. Starting in the episode Secrets and Lies, when they did that episode when Cole lost his memory for a little bit until his memories resurfaced of him being a Power Ranger, and then about the very end of the episode when we had a revelation about Master Org being once human, and then when the Rangers went to a cemetery in Turtle Cove, they find out that Cole's parents actually did die, but then, shock of all shock, Cole was dead too as a baby. Really? Died as only, you know, but he's really still alive. It's just he was adopted by jungle people, and his parents are the ones that actually died. This is one of the most cathartic, darkest things to ever happen to a Red Ranger. You know, and that's what made Cole one of my favorite Red Rangers, of how tragic and sad that this guy has gone through. But even though he's a very kind at heart, you know, empathetic leader. Even though, yeah, he can be clueless and stupid because, you know, jungle people are like that. But as a Red Ranger who was raised in the jungle, was born with parents, but lost parents when he was only a baby, a lot like Disney's Tarzan. Oh, so that's where Disney, when they did the season of Power Rangers, got the idea from. They figured, well, since after growing up on Disney's animated take on Tarzan, I figured there was some shades of Disney's animated Tarzan into our leading Red Ranger for the season, in a way. Because again, when you think about it, you know, Wild Force did had some semblances of what we had from past Disney movies. Because again, 2002 was technically the end of the 90s. You know, anything that we have from the 90s must come to an end before like 2004 or after. Because, you know, what we had back then, well, yeah, it has to come to an end at this point. And I minded them for that, because they needed to put an end to something. You know, I mean, I minded that because, again, with the references, you know, the Disney references, since Wild Force was owned by Disney at the time. So it made sense. I would say Taylor was another interesting Ranger because, again, the queen of all Yellow Rangers, much like how Jen is the queen of all Pink Rangers in Time Force. Now, Taylor is the best of the bunch because you want to know why? Before we have the MCU Captain Marvel by Brie Larson, we had Taylor Earhart, Soaring Eagle, the Yellow Ranger, Air Force pilot, and she was basically more of a leader, or like second in command of the Wild Force Rangers. Or no, actually, Taylor felt more like a leader, but while Cole is the leader, but Taylor was a second leader, you know, or more, well, actually, she was, of course, indicted to be the first Wild Force Ranger before Danny, Max, and Alyssa came on. And then Cole will be last, and then, you know, because basically Taylor was very interesting to me because, again, I've always related to Taylor. Why do you think she ended up being one of my favorite Rangers, if not one of my favorite Yellow Rangers of Power Rangers? I like that we have a Yellow Ranger who was part of a military background, the Air Force mainly, and I like how stricken and disciplined and direct she is, but even though that's how she was in the beginning. But of course, I would say, but again, we can all agree Reinforcements from the Future is where her character went through a very major change of character, and I amended Reinforcements from the Future for changing her from what she always was since the beginning. She mellowed out over time, but even though then again, she'll always be that badass queen of all Yellow Rangers and the Soaring Eagle. As for the others, Alyssa, Danny, and Max, though, Alyssa is fine. Alyssa was, basically a college student ranger. And, I wish we, as much as I mind rangers who are high school teenagers, can we please get more Power Rangers that are like college age, like Alyssa was 20 years ago in future seasons? Because, look, nothing wrong with high school age rangers and our teenagers. Can we please get more rangers that are at least in college, like in their 20s and stuff like that, and rangers that are working in jobs more? Because, like, I'm kind of tired of these rangers that are high school teenagers at this rate, even though that's how the show started. It started with teenagers. It will probably end with teenagers, like, poetically. And that's what Dino Fury was supposed to somewhat be. Well, Alyssa, she was, I don't know what to say either way, but she was somewhat a good foil for Danny and Max, though. And she was the second most empathetic character next to Cole. And while I did amend her for some episodes, well, even on one episode that struck me, Father's Footsteps, where, she was supposed to meet her dad while she was in school and stuff, and her dad was visiting the city, but then her ranger duties got caught up, and then she, if you go back to that Father's Footsteps episode. But then when her father found out, and when she skipped class, in favor of ranger duties, and find her own path and being a school teacher, teaching, study to want to be someone for school and stuff like that, school teacher or whatever. She found her own path of the tiger that way. The noble tiger in her for that. But I did like that her father, I'm glad that the show didn't make her father too strict in that episode, but I think I amended that episode for having her father find out that she is the White Ranger. As for Danny and Max, though, let's face it. Now, Danny and Max, their friendship, the bromance, if you will, between the two, it's kind of fascinating when you think about it. Like, Danny and Max, they had this big brother, little brother, but still bromanced complex thing going on between the two. Danny being taller than him while Max is shorter. And I know Max has those insecurities of being the kid of the group. And, again, we're copying what they copied what Gal Blue went through in Gal Ranger with the whole, I'm not a kid, okay? Stop calling me that. Treat me like a man and all that stuff. Well, Danny was the tall, soft-hearted dude of the bunch, and while he was like the big brother of the team, and Max being the little brother of the group. And I see how they did the chemistry with the Rangers here. Like, Danny and Max are like big brother, little brother, and Taylor is the more direct authoritative big sister or so, and Alyssa whatever, and then Cole being the new adopted guy in town, new adopted kid in town and stuff like that, with that kind of grouping. And Merrick as the lone wolf who doesn't want anything to do with them, but then he has to realize that they all have the same purpose. After all, the Zenaku curse was broken for him. But Danny and Max, though, Max had a few good focus episodes, but not much to advance his character, like even with the that episode with the bowling ball, or when he got trapped by the Bell Org, about him and Danny never giving up. And Danny himself, while he may be the tall, strong, brute iron bison of the group, but even he has his own insecurities of failing to not give up, but he has no choice. But they both need to not give up when the task is at hand. And I think that's probably where those characters had somewhat excelled. But yeah, they still have that bromance, quote unquote. But then again, I hate to say it, whenever I hear them say never give up, it's part of their motto. Sure, yeah, I mean, we may have heard certain quotations from various seasons of Power Rangers like more phenomenal or let's do it or something, but we can get with never give up because, well, actually, outside of the season, while Wild Force popularized, if that's even a word, the term, the three words of never give up, we've had never give up in other seasons of Power Rangers before and after the season. But at least they don't go full on never give up a whole bunch of times like this season did with Danny and Max. But again, it's part of their motto, it's part of their punchline, it's part of their, it's one of their iconic quotations. Because, while also this is another thing that got me because, when I was a kid, you know, when these Power Rangers aired after my mom passed, and I'm never gonna forget how, like, when me and my brother were still young kids watching these Rangers, my dad, even after when he saw Wild Force throughout all 40 episodes, he never did. My dad, here's a fun fact. My dad, who was also in the Power Rangers, like I said before in the Time Force retrospective last year, that my dad used to love Power Rangers when he was still on this earth. But of all the seasons, he always hated Wild Force. He hated Wild Force because he could not stand the Rangers. He just didn't like the show overall. But more importantly, now, my dad was not only he was a fan of Power Rangers and pro wrestling, he was in the soap operas. My dad used to watch soap operas like Days of Our Lives, General Hospital, Guiding Light, and those soaps. But what got him was, years after these Power Rangers aired, he caught the actor who played the Blue Wild Force Ranger on a couple of episodes of Passions, that soap opera that used to air on NBC the same time as Days of Our Lives from 1998 or so until it ended in 2008. Yeah, Passions lasted for quite some time until 2008. It didn't last as long as, let's say, Days of Our Lives, them soap operas. But what got him was when he saw the actor who played the Blue Wild Force Ranger on Passions, and when he saw him play a he-she transgender character. Again, this was back in the 2000s when I was younger and when I was starting to slowly understand that gay, lesbian, queer people exist. But I was a little too young to know that yet. But yet they exist. Even though I remember watching an episode of The Simpsons when that one episode of The Simpsons during the 2000s, one of those post-season 10 episodes once The Simpsons started rotting to what it would be now. Back in the 2000s, there was an episode of The Simpsons where where The Simpsons held a gay marriage thing at their house and garage, and when one of Marge's sisters, I think it's Selma, that came out a lesbian, or is it Patty? One of them. And I think that's when I found my first instance of gay people being represented in television at the time. But even though I was too young to not know that yet, but wait until I was old enough to, know that those people existed. Okay. But look, it was the 2000s. The 2000s and even earlier in film and television wasn't so keen and kind to LGBT individuals and even characters in film and television or animation and video games to have any characters coded to be gay. Yeah, Danny and Max in a way did have this gay thing going on with those two characters, with their bromance and never give up, and because it was always a part of the characters. But even though my dad never, and I mean never, liked these Power Rangers because of the two Black and Blue Rangers with their never give up crap, and that's why he never, and I mean never, did like how he saw the actor who played the Blue Ranger being on a soap opera playing a transgender character who was actually played by a woman who was just on that show playing what was his character in that soap opera. And that's why her dad was like, I'm not letting you guys watch these Power Rangers no more. I don't want y'all watching Wild Force. And I don't want to hear, if I hear an episode of Wild Force in the background, I want you to turn this shit off. Because again, how that stuff was back then. But Danny and Max, though, they were all right. Man, that never give up stuff can be eye-rolling at times. But then on to Merrick, the last Ranger of the bunch. I've already mentioned Zenaku, but man, it seemed like once Merrick revealed himself after the Zenaku curse was broken and when the mask was destroyed, the wolf mask was destroyed, and when he became the Little Wolf Ranger, I wish they called him just Wild Force Silver Ranger to be more easier. But Merrick is like a freaking downgrade of what we've had come before. Yeah, I understand. And Merrick in some ways do remind me a little bit of Tommy, but lamer. But even though, come to think of it, no, I'm not going to say about the Wild Force Rangers being similar to the Mighty Morphin characters, because there's no way. But Merrick was just lame. And honestly, I don't even know what to make of his character, besides him and Princess Shayla having a thing. But that they've had for 3,000 years. But I honestly, I don't really get Merrick. And also, even every time I look at Merrick when he has those lone wolf guy bangs and stuff like that, he kind of reminds me of Bam Margera when Bam Margera had that hairstyle in the 2000s, and the soul patch under his chin and stuff. But with that look and with the Howling Wolf jacket, as much as I love that jacket, but that dude was something else, man. It's like they couldn't even tell that if he should be part of the Rangers or not. And it's very conflicting. At least when Tommy joined the team after the Evil Green Ranger stuff ended, at least Jason, Kimberly, and them opened Tommy with welcoming arms and have him as their sixth Ranger. At least Tommy wasn't like what we saw later on with Merrick. But Merrick was also a downgrade of what had came of Eric's character as the Quantum Ranger. Even this is one of the reasons why I prefer the Quantum Ranger over Lunar Wolf Ranger. I'm sorry, but it's just true. But on to our allies, though, even though one in particular, I'm sorry to say this about Princess Shayla, but she is one of the worst mentors we've had in this series. And like, while I may somewhat tolerate her at times, then let's say Demetria from Turbo, I don't know what's up with. I don't know what is it with these female mentors and Power Rangers who have a white outfit, dress or lab coat or otherwise. Except, well, say for Dr. K and RPM. Dr. K is the better female mentor or so character who wears white in Power Rangers. But Demetria and Princess Shayla were just upperhandedly horrible and horribly underwritten. Well, Udana in a way in Mystic Force, but Princess Shayla though, I hated how she was kidnapped multiple times over the course of the 40 episodes of the season. I don't know. Maybe this has got to be some sort of freaking Disney princess thing. And like, what is up this woman in white getting kidnapped multiple times by the orgs? What's up with that crap? And more importantly, there's another thing I didn't like about her. I feel like she feels more like a Disney princess reject than anything. Now, nothing against her actress, Anne-Marie Crouch, I think. But like, she just feels like she basically also paved the way to what Udana would be. But at least Udana has common sense not to get kidnapped all the time. Yeah, she was still running to that. I mean, but even though as the mother of a Red Ranger and a white sorceress of the Mystic Force and stuff, but at least I can tolerate Udana because, she's a mom and all of that. But Princess Shayla, I'm sorry, but she was just a horrible, horrible, horrible character and a horrible mentor and all that. I mean, what is she even a mentor of? And that's what I want to know. And another thing I also hated about her is that goddamn fucking song about the Deer Zord that they would play for throughout a few episodes in the series, and it gets on my aggravating fucking nerves, man. And like, I know some of you guys like that song, the about the ode of nature and all of that shit, but for the last 20 years, I hate that fucking song she keeps singing about the Deer Zord. I hate it. I can't stand it. Where in a way, like Linkara said in his updated version of this season for History of Power Rangers, that he mentioned about how the song was very similar to Colors of the Wind from Disney's Pocahontas in some ways in terms of his instrumentation and build up and gravitas in its orchestration. But I really hate how that song was trying to be like it. And plus the music video segment for that song. OMG, that's terrible. Very amateurish for early 2000s kid show fare. And especially for Power Rangers, you would expect that instead of them having her being shot behind multiple stock footage of, wildlife and nature and flowers and mountains and river falls and stuff, why couldn't they do this outside instead of like with that crappy green screen? Like you guys are filming or reshooting the opening theme of Walker Texas Ranger with that kind of budget for that music video segment. Like, Jesus Christ. And And also, I can't stand the song. It makes me want to like, man, I'm gonna go jump off somewhere. I hate that song. Every time I come back to the season, I hear that song. I just want to jump off somewhere. I want to go jump off. No, well, okay, that's just a figure of speech. Not really gonna do it in real life or anything. But like, or just like, God, kill me, kind of shit. That feeling. And like that song smothers me every time I come back to the season, and every time I come back to it, every time I come back to that Ode to Nature crap. They play it a few times. Yeah, there was a remix of it in Reinforcements from the Future, but I can't stand it. And I can't stand it with that. I like la la la. I like nature. Nature is nice, la la. But I'm so sick and freaking tired of it. I'm sick of it. Now, at least when I was watching the Sentai counterpart of Wild Force, that being Gal Ranger. Now, Gal Ranger, when they did it with their equivalent of Princess Shayla, I'm sorry, I forgot her name. But, as much as I like Japanese women singing, at least her Sentai counterpart, when she did the Deer Zords, Gal Deer, was it? And when she did her variant of that song, at least I can tolerate that instrumentation and that gravitas than how it was done here with Ode to Nature for Power Rangers. I really hate it. And I can't believe they had to recite that for the 20th anniversary at this year's Wild Force panel at Power Morphicon. God, and OMG, I had to skip that when watching that on YouTube for that Power Morphicon panel with that. It's just, Jesus Christ. Despite some of the bad stuff about the season, with some of the poor acting, some of the, again, that awful song of Shayla's notwithstanding, and with it being a very underrated season of Power Rangers, I actually like Wild Force. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some good things to like about Wild Force. It's just, like I said, it's not meant to be good. Like, it's not supposed to be better than the previous season. But of course, there will be better. Of course, there have came better seasons than this. But the series has been severely underrated for the longest amount of time. And I feel like people should appreciate Wild Force for what it tried to do. It's not meant to be better than the last season, and it shouldn't be. Because when you try to up the ante from Time Force, you know damn well you're never going to be better than it. Don't even try to attempt to be better than Time Force, because you'll never be better at it. But there have been, of course, as time went on, there have been other seasons that have surpassed Wild Force. Mystic Force sort of in ways surpassed it, but Mystic Force is a take it or leave it kind of season of Rangers. So there you have it with that. Before I wrap up, I do want to talk about, to commemorate the end of the anniversary, I do want to talk about what is my favorite episode of Wild Force and what is definitely my worst episode. But actually, besides Sing Song, there's been a handful of episodes regarding about Princess Shayla and that singing. And of course, yes, the Animus stuff, the Animus storyline is like the worst, basically. Before I get to my best episode of Wild Force, in retrospect, the worst episodes of Wild Force, in my opinion, is Sing Song and the flute and... Well, the flute is part of the Homecoming storyline, and the entire goddamn Animus storyline. Because, to be honest, though, the Animus storyline pissed me off so goddamn fucking much. It was so patronizing. You put Captain Planet's messaging of the power is yours and protect the environment to shame. Jesus Christ. With that. But then again, Sing Song is definitely the fucking worst. But although the Animus arc is really the worst in my opinion, because I hate it when Animus took the Rangers' Wild Zords away. I hate how, Kite being a child embodiment of Animus reincarnate, and he monitors everything that goes on Earth and acts like, oh, humans are bad, we did terrible, and we should be feeling guilty for ourselves for harming the environment with this toxicity in the world and stuff like that. And it's hard to discuss that stuff because really it was very maddeningly frustrating talking about the Animus storyline. I don't even want to talk about it, but it was one of the worst aspects of Wild Force. I lost interest in the season at this point for a while, until once Forever Red came up, my interest in Wild Force came back. But then after Forever Red, interest in the season really waned, and I think at this point, this is why Wild Force was intended, once again, like In Space before it, Wild Force was intended to be the end of Power Rangers, hence why the two-part finale was called it. Well, okay, while Wild Force had its bad episodes, there were a few good ones. But although, if there's one episode that actually was the highlight of Wild Force, well, I can't choose both. I can't have both team up episodes. Either Forever Red was a highlight or was Reinforcements from the Future. So you know what? I'm going to go with Reinforcements from the Future. Definitely. Hands down. And Reinforcements from the Future, like I said, was a great advancement for both the Time Force and Wild Force Rangers. And while I did like how they advanced the story of Time Force and its cast and saying farewell to a handful of those characters, Wes will come back a couple of times after Reinforcements from the Future. Of course, he would come back again in Forever Red, and then 12 years later in Super Mega Force, and then a few years later again for Super Ninja Steel's Dimensions in Danger. But everybody else from Time Force, we have to say goodbye to everybody. Nadira, Rancic, Jen, Lucas, Katie, Eric, and Trip, and even Circuit. And even though I did like the idea of them doing the mute orgs, which are just basically recycles of past monster suits, even though one of those mutants, what surprised me was some Reverence of Lost Galaxy with like, oh, one of the Duke orgs is based off Deviant's mutant form with some bat wings and stuff on it. But yeah, Reinforcements from the Future, what I did loved about that episode, and one of the reasons why I loved it so much, is that it's one of the many few times that Power Rangers where it doesn't use Sentai footage, but even though, again, since there was no Gal Ranger versus Time Ranger that they did during Gal Ranger's run, they decided, let's just do Gal Ranger versus Super Sentai instead. So that's one of the reasons why there is some concepts of Gal Ranger versus Super Sentai in Reinforcements from the Future. And also Forever Red took some elements of Gal Ranger versus Super Sentai also, mainly for the Red Ranger reunion team-up aspect. But yeah, Reinforcements from the Future is the absolute best episode of Time Force. I mean, Wild Force! God damn, I'm getting these seasons mixed up. Here I go. I made that mistake again like last night. So yeah, those are my thoughts about the 20th anniversary of Power Rangers Wild Force. You know, it's a good season. It's just... it was a really underrated season, to say the least. But even though I'd rather take a season of Power Rangers like this over, let's say, Dino Fury or Megaforce, because at least Wild Force was a tolerable anniversary season, as opposed to the later two anniversaries, or, okay, three, well, if you count Ninja Steel and Super Ninja Steel. But, yeah, Power Rangers Wild Force overall was a good series. It's just, it was criminally underrated, and you even have your handful of people who hate the season, my dad included. But other than that, I'd rather take a season like Wild Force over, let's say, Dino Fury, but, you know, which I just recently watched. But Wild Force was competent in ways with its acting and writing, but although I still don't like Shayla's stupid dumb song for the Deer Zord or the anime storyline. But yeah, we had some good villains, great cast of Rangers. Mentor sucks though, and Animus being a godly Jesus Megazord thing, but hey, that's all I can say about the season. So with the 20th anniversary over of Wild Force, let's prepare ourselves to go Ninja Storm Ranger form with Ninja Storm's 20th anniversary in 2023 while we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the overall Power Rangers franchise.